Yeah, so my name's Eric Small. I'm a senior medical animator at Mad Microbe Studio. So today what I want to talk about is something somewhat simple, but also something very powerful, and that's the use of constraints. Constraints is a technique of sticking one object to another, or getting things to bind to one another without them being directly related, like in a parent-child relationship. So let me just play a quick shot here. The complement pathway, and you see we got a ton of molecules on here. And everything in here could have been animated just with position and rotational keyframes, but when I put this shot together, there were so many things that needed to stick together and remain stuck to one another that it just made more sense to do them with constraints instead of trying to maintain the exact offset and make sure that everything stays with one another. This is another one. This is just a hand simply picking up a vial, but it needed to bring it closer to the camera, show it, set it down. Again, it could have been done with the just doing positional keyframe rotations, but in order for it to actually stick and make it look like it was in the fingers and being held there, much better to use constraints and not have to worry about any of that. So part of this shot that I'm going to break down is just this middle section here where the purple molecule comes in and the pink binds to it, and then this other purple and orange one. This is the formation of C5 convertase within the complement pathway. But before I get into that, I just want to talk about constraints in general. What are they? How do you set them up? And some of the pitfalls. And the main reason that I was wanted to talk about this topic today was I was talking with a couple of my coworkers, and they were expressing frustration with how unstable constraints are, and how they always avoid them. And really, if you set them up the correct way from the very beginning, you're never going to have any of those issues. So just go over briefly, just using the conventional primitives here, show how to work with constraints and not get them to be glitchy. So to get started, I'm just going to put a vibrate tag on our cube here and activate the amplitude. So now we can hit play, and we've got our cube just flying around. Now if I want to stick this sphere to the cube, I could just make it a child, and so now the cube is the parent of the sphere, and we see that it moves perfectly in sync with the cube. I take that out, it stays still again. That works great if you can leverage the power of the parent-child relationship, but you can't always do that in your scene file depending on what needs to go where, how things need to be animated. So instead what we can do is go to the rigging tags, and I can add a constraint tag. And I want to activate the transform constraint because I want to constrain the sphere to the cube. So drop that in, and we see immediately the sphere sticks to the cube, just as if it were a child of the cube in the hierarchy. Now, awesome thing about this is that we have the ability to keyframe the strength of this this property. So if we can keyframe here at 100%, so this is when the sphere is going to be stuck to the cube, I can then keyframe, oh, thank you, sir. I can then drop this strength and keyframe it again. So now over here on the left side of it, when the strength of the constraint is 0%, the sphere is not interacting or stuck to the cube at all. But if we move forward in time to where that strength is set to 100%, now we see that sphere is stuck to the cube. Now, the one pitfall that I think people run into, though, and get a little, have issues with the constraints, is that of course, when you're animating things, you're going to be scrubbing your timeline, and you're going to be jumping back and forth, and you might jump back in time to when that strength of that constraint is 0%. And if I do that right now, that sphere stays exactly in the same place. If I move forward in time, of course, it's going to go back and follow where that cube is going along. But right now, if I jump back again, that sphere stays in the same place, but it's not in the same location as it was last time. And I feel like a lot of people get frustrated with this because it seems it's like an air of unpredictability within the tag, within the constraint system. The way around this is really quite simple. If we go back before the tag is at 0%, and let's say I like to just set a keyframe, and I think of it as like a little bookmark. So I'm going to go and just move the sphere back to the origin, set the keyframe. I like to set the bookmark keyframe at the 0 frame mark just for organizational standpoint. And now if we hit play, sphere moves in just like we did before. But the beautiful thing is that if we rewind all the way to 0, that sphere jumps right back to where that keyframe was. So you're always going to know where that sphere is going to end up. And we can even do that in real time here. If we go back, as the strength of the constraint goes from 0 or 100 back to 0, you see that sphere animate back to the origin smoothly. So that's one of the pitfalls I think that really kind of gets a little confusing or irritating with the constraint system. If you set a little bookmark keyframe, it should solve most of the problems. All right, boring stuff over. Let's go into an actual scene here. So, like I said, we're going to look at the formation of the C5 convertase right here, and then we're going to show how the alpha portion of that molecule gets cleaved off. So I've got all 4 molecules right here, and they're registered with one another. These molecules came from PDB, and molecules have a very specific orientation and location that they always need to bind together in order for it to be an accurate molecular complex. Like I said, these came from PDB, so I am confident that the way they were published there, this is accurate, and that's what I'm going to move forward with. So what I like to do is I like to work backwards. I start with the assembled molecule, and then we'll animate them, moving apart, which then, we can reverse that and we can have them coming together and assembling into this complex. So here they are fully assembled. What I'm going to do is I want to take this fully assembled complex and I want to make little anchors where they're ultimately going to be constrained and where they're going to end up. So I'm going to grab all 4 of these and I'm going to use my commander and I'm going to type in a command that is called convert to nulls. And by doing that, what we're doing is Cinema 4D is placing null objects in the exact position and rotation of these molecules. So for where C4b is located, if I look at the null that was created right there, that's also in that exact same orientation and location. So I'm going to use these as the ultimate destination for where these molecules, they're going to animate in close, and then we're going to use constraints to stick them to these destination nulls. So in order to make our life a little bit more understandable, I'm going to go to Tools, Naming. I'm going to add underscore.dest just for destination. It's a way that makes sense to me. I know that I'm going to be constraining these to their ultimate destination. So just by using that naming tool, real quick, get that suffix added to them. So the first molecule to bind is going to be, I want my surface on, is the C4. That's the one that's making contact with the surface. So let's start with that one. I'm going to, first I think let's actually move it away from the surface. We know we're going to constrain it to the destination, that null, and that's in place. We know where that is. So I'm going to move our molecule back and away and just kind of set its rotation and call that good. And I think we'll have that, we'll set a keyframe at about frame 60 in our position and rotation. Now that we've got our bookmark keyframe, like we talked about in a little simple setup, I'm going to right click and add a constraint tag and transform. And I'm going to drag in that C4b destination. And right away that snaps into place. So I'm going to set my keyframe, or I'm going to keyframe the strength of the constraint to 100%. Drop back a few frames in time and set it to 0. And now we see as we update the viewport, the molecule snaps back to where we set that bookmark keyframe. So it goes from that bookmark keyframe to its final destination. So now I'm going to just rewind in time and have this move just somewhere off a little bit in space, and this is where it's going to kind of glide into place, starting at frame 0. Change the rotation a little bit, and set keyframes. I'm actually going to turn on my auto keyframe right now. Auto keyframe is whenever you set the initial keyframe of an object, then anytime you move it later on, it will automatically set a keyframe for you, so you don't have to be going over and clicking the diamonds every single time. Be careful of that. That can actually come back to bite you if you forget that it's on, but the big red line around your viewport always indicates when you've got your auto keyframe turned on. So if we kind of move forward, we see it come in, and it snaps into place. Perfect. All right, let's move on to the next molecule. So let's go to, let's say, A-frame 84, and let's see how this is oriented. I'm going to move this up and back, adjust the rotation a little bit, and then I'm going to set keyframe, and we'll go in like we did last time, rigging, and go to constraint, set the transform, and I'm going to drag in the C2B destination. All right, so good to go, and I'm going to set the keyframe, the strength at 100%, drop back in time, set it back down to 0, and you see that that automatically changed and added that keyframe for me. So we see that that snaps back to that bookmark keyframe, and we see it snap in. So I'm going to rewind and just set then this molecule. I guess we'll make it move maybe back this way a little bit, change its rotation, move it up. So if we hit play, we've got our first molecule enter, binds, second molecule binds. We're on our way. All right, the next two molecules, C3b and C3a. These are two molecules that are bound together, and in this particular complex, after they bind, the C2a portion, which is the smaller portion here, is what gets cleaved off. So we've got our location. I'm going to keyframe their position and rotation, and add rigging and constraint tag one more time. Transform, drag in the C3b and the C3a destination. And just like we did before, I'm going to set the keyframe strength to 100%. Back in time, drop it down to 0. And we should see them stay exactly where they are. Reason for that is when I set the keyframe, I did not actually move them. So let's do this. I'm going to disable the constraint for the moment. And now we have the ability to grab these and move these and change their rotation. And since I already have that keyframed, it should update. Yes, so my keyframes are good to go. Now as soon as I re-enable the constraint tags, they'll snap right back into place. But remember, we've already keyframed the strength of the constraint from 100 down to 0. So we're all set. I'm going to drop back in time here and move these. Since these are going to take the longest to get to their destination, I'm going to move them farthest away from their ultimate binding location. And change the rotation, and that should be good. Now, if we hit play, we've got the three molecules converging on their final location, bind 1, bind 2, bind 3. But if you noticed there in the C3a and C3b, look at this a little bit closer. As they're coming in, they're not remaining registered with each other. They're not rotating and like sticking together, right? Because they're two separate objects and they're both keyframed from one location to another. And because they're not stuck together, they have that independence. They're not constrained to one another. They are constrained to their final location here, and we're all set. In order to get that to the smaller molecule to stick to the larger molecule, instead of having the destination for the C3a be stuck with the other destination null objects over here in space, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take the C3a destination and make that a child of the C3b. So now, and then I'm also going to delete the keyframes on this, so the strength of this constraint is 100% at all time. So now, think back to that parent-child relationship, that destination of the C3a is a child of the C3b. So as it moves through space as a child, the C3a molecule is stuck to that. And so now it follows along as if it was a child of this molecule right here, and it maintains that perfect orientation and offset and binding location. But now what we have to do is we have to kind of reverse the keyframes, because this is the part that gets cleaved. When you've got the constraint set to 100%, if you go to move this object, nothing moves. C4D thought I was trying to move it, and so it set the keyframe automatically on me because I'm in auto key. But anyways, so what we got to do now is we have to reverse the keyframing that we've been doing. So instead of going from 0 to 100%, I'm going to go from 100% strength down to 0% strength. Now, I want to make sure that I have that bookmark keyframe. And so since this is always stuck to the larger molecule, the larger portion of it, I'm going to delete this, the bookmark keyframe that I'd set previously. And I do that by highlighting the property that I want to delete. I'm hitting Control Shift, and that will remove the keyframe from that property. But see, now this is where I've keyframed the strength, starting at 100% and going down to 0. So this is where I'm going to set my new bookmark. This is where the animation is going to pick up. And so I can go ahead in time, and I can animate this cleaving off, maybe give it a little rotation. And we should see come in, bind, and cleave. Now, all of this could be done with just position and rotational keyframes. You know, it's not a super complex setup. It's really just 4 models, and you can totally do that. But the advantage of using the constraint system is, well, here, let's just take a look. The benefit comes in is when you want to start finessing the F-curves. You know, easing things, accelerating, decelerating. And so here, let's take a look at just this. We keyframe the position and rotation of the smaller molecule right here. And if I want to adjust the easing of that, of the position and the rotation of that, as it accelerates and decelerates after it gets cleaved, I'm looking at 6 individual properties: the X, the Y, the Z in the position, and the heading, the pitch, and the rotation, and the banking in the rotation. So I have to make sure all of those are adjusted cohesively in order to get it to look like it's popping off, like it's accelerating suddenly and then slowly decelerating. And I mean, it's not a huge challenge, don't get me wrong, it's totally doable. And you know, so just adjusting that real quick. But you see now, just because I dragged these the handles here, the pathway went from moving straight up to now we've got this arc in the movement, which is cool. It's fine. It might work, but if that's not the intended trajectory, that might be more work. Then now you got to go back in and figure out, okay, how do I do that? How do I fix that? The advantage of using constraints is that you only have a single property that you need to deal with. It's that property of animating from 0 to 100%. So if we go in and we want to adjust, say, the first binding of the C4 molecule, we want this to start slow and then snap into place really quick. All I have to do is just adjust one handle, and now it slowly accelerates in and snaps into place. So instead of 6 properties to wrangle, I got 1. So that would be my argument as for why to consider using constraints instead of just position and rotational keyframes. So moving forward, that's how I use constraints in molecular animation. If we have time at the end, I haven't really prepared this portion of it, but there's another way that we can get into using a very similar technique with MoGraph and using inheritance instead. But right now, I'm going to move forward to the macro, and I'll take questions at the end. So next one here is this hand, and I think I showed, yeah, this one. You know, like I said, the hand comes in, picks up the vial, shows it, moves it around, and then brings it over and sets it down on the other side of the screen. So here I've got this hand animated, and the hand comes in. You know, we're going to pick up the vial, show it around, and like I said, it's going to set it down. So come in close and take a look, and we're going to see when these fingers start to pick it up. It's right about, I think right about here, right around frame 17 is when the fingers actually grasp the lid, and we're going to start to pick it up. So just like I did before, I'm going to grab the parentmost null of the vial, and in the commander, I'm going to convert to nulls, and I'm going to say vial in hand. And I'm going to make this null a child of the hand controller. And the hand controller is this green box right here. This is what's actually animated and what's moving through space and controlling the rigged hand as it moves. So right here, we'll take vial in hand, that one that we created, and make that a child of the hand controller. So now as the hand moves in, we see that null that we created is moving right where we need it to be. It's right here at frame 17 where we're going to add a constraint tag, and we're going to go to the transform tag just like we did before, and I'm going to drag in that vial in hand. So now as we move forward, we see that that vial picked up, it's perfectly registered, it looks like it's grasped between the fingers, and it's moving, and we're good. But when we go to go before frame 17, we see that that's still on there. Well, just like we were doing with the molecules, at frame 17, I'm going to keyframe the strength of the constraint. I'm going to move backward just one frame this time, and I'm going to drop that strength down to 0. All right, here we are. Picks it up. We're good to go. But, oops, I guess we forgot to put our bookmark keyframe on that. So what I'm going to do is right when the vial gets picked up at frame 17, I am going to go to the vial itself, and I'm going to keyframe the position and the rotation. So now when that constraint goes down to 0, Cinema 4D is going to know exactly where to keep that vial in place. As the hand comes in and picks it up, the constraint tag is overriding the position and the rotation keyframes, and it sticks right there in the fingers. Likewise then, we're going to just reverse that process when the hand drops it down. So if we look forward, we're looking at the hand controller right here, and we got the Y position of it. And it looks like right around frame 196 is where the hand is going to be lowering it down, and that's where the vial is going to make contact with the surface. So that's where we know we're going to start unloading the constraint. So at frame 196, I'm going to set a keyframe and move forward one frame, and I'm going to drop that down to 0. And the vial snaps to a different location. Well, remember that bookmark frame that we created just a minute ago, that's the previous location. So at this point, we need to, before the strength of the constraint is animated off of 100%, we need to set ourselves one more bookmark keyframe, because this is going to be the final destination of the vial. We want to have this keyframe in place. So when the constraint does animate down to 0, this is exactly where the vial is going to remain. So as we play through, vial sets down, and then we continue on. There's a little twist and, all that fun stuff. But I will go into this. I have talked in the past about the principles of animation and how to make boring animation better and more engaging. One thing that you can do with something like this, if this hand were to set the vial down perfectly upright and just let it go, and that's it, that's fine, that's adequate, but that's kind of boring. That's linear, that's mechanical. If this is supposed to be a real hand, let's have it set it down. Like if you set something down on the table, you typically don't set it down exactly even. You might set it down a little bit on its edge, and then it rocks forward. And if we look at the angle of the vial as it's being set down, it's a little at an angle. So what we can do is, since we set that keyframe already, we move forward and we see where the hand moves next. We see that if we go forward about 4 frames, what we could do is we can zero out the rotation of this vial and then have it move forward just a little bit. Now it looks like the vial is being placed down and then rotated and rocked into place. So those little extra touches can take a linear and mechanical animation and make it feel more organic and aesthetic. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them below.